All right. Welcome to the, I think, 31st meeting we've had. It is October 4th. We are now kind of at the tail end of the project scope that we had outlined. We still have a little bit more to do, a lot of which we'll be talking about on the call. Um, there have been no new releases code-wise. That is still brewing. We have a lot of stuff in the pipeline, but in order to maintain compatibility between all of the various pieces, we're going to kind of clump them all together in simultaneous releases. I guess that's probably the best way to put it. The Antelope library's got an update coming. The action return values that we discussed in Telegram, those are, we need to make a few tweaks to them, but those will be in the next version of that library. The 1.1 of the session library has a bunch of fixes and things that people have been talking about in Telegram chat. This will also come with the contract kit 1.0 and the account kit 1.0, which we have, I believe, started making progress on one of our blockers from. There was the way we were using generics in the account kit was forcing some instances of generics, and that didn't work for JavaScript developers, obviously. It would only work for TypeScript. So I think we have a path around that. We're waiting for a PR on that right now. Lots of little tweaks that we're just kind of building up to get all of these simultaneous releases pushed out. So there have been a couple other minor little things I think we've talked about already, though, like the Anchor plugin got an update that includes some of the, my brain is just melting right now. Some of the features that Anchor Link had. So that way, when you go to reconnect, it'll propose, or like it'll show you a QR for those who are using multi-device setups, things like that. There is another version of that coming because in the session kit, one thing in 1.1 that's allowed now is the returning of identity proofs. Some sort of proof that the user during the login process signed a transaction that authenticated that they own that account. Those will now flow from the login plugin to the application, so that way the application can verify them, or if they want to pass them off to a backend or whatever to kind of create a traditional session with some non-blockchain API, they can do that as well.
In that one, the server is providing like the special message that needs to be signed, or just normally like I mean, like, because if the signing is happening on the front end, uh, and Anchor Wharf is generating that message, like there's no guarantee that like it's
Right.
Like the server won't know basically.
like
We need
like
actually some
how I use it, like when we do invites or things, the server itself would generate like a token or like some type of unique message with a date or something, and then that person is signing that message and returning it back. So I know for sure that it's what the server sent that day, like that time, got signed, versus the guy sending me a pre-signed thing or something.
Yeah. For identity proofs on our side, on the Anchor side, to support that, we need to modify how that works before nonces can really be included or some sort of unique data. I was reading, I don't remember which tech stack it was, but over the last week, I was reading approaches to mitigate this. And one of the things that I think could actually solve this without having to have that arbitrary data is if these backend services actually like recorded the transaction IDs and only allowed them to be used once. I know that's how one-time codes work as well, is that if the one-time use code, like on a Google Authenticator or whatever, or Authy, once that code is used to prevent replay attacks, they just don't allow that code to be used, and they maintain a small cache of that. I think we could potentially do that with transactions and avoid needing arbitrary data. But I think arbitrary data is still something we want to add in at some point.
Yeah, like you mean, but then even if you enforce whatever, you're gonna enforce it only on the front end, which can all be edited. And I don't know, like if we do that on the server, the transaction ID used once, like then you have to switch that server to like a state server that's like has a database and needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
This kind of additional,
Work
versus like I try to keep servers in general
as stateless as possible, or can be, if they use a database, it can be reconstructed straight from like a GraphQL query or something. And that way it's just like, less stuff to manage or be concerned about, because what if one day, for whatever reason, your backups don't work and your history, you're going to be vulnerable to replays.
Right. I guess the state wouldn't have to be maintained that long in this situation. These transactions do have expirations, which the backend, could statelessly verify that it's expired. So realistically, those things would only have to be kept in state for as long as the expiration exists, is valid, which is like 2 to 5 minutes or whatever.
Right. So you can just keep it in memory for that session.
Yeah. And if there wouldn't have to be any persistent state, like between restarts or yeah. It is an option. The push we're making on this right now is just to expose the systems that we have today. And kind of going back to last week, changing the identity proof payload format to allow some form of arbitrary data is something we want, but that is outside of the scope of the project, and we just need to set everything aside that's not in scope aside for now so we can actually finish delivering on this.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. And 1.1 will include support for the existing format, despite it not having arbitrary data. So at least it'll be exposed. It's not exposed at all right now. The login plugin returns it, and then the session kit just kind of abandons it. So 1.1 of the session kit will at least allow that information to start flowing back. Then we can upgrade the identity proof to allow some sort of arbitrary data at a point in the future. And then once that new arbitrary data is part of the signature and the signature comes back, then it'll just automatically flow through that as long as we just upgrade the dependencies. So there's room for improvement, definitely. Cool. The bigger tasks this week and the bigger updates is we've just been hammering on documentation. That has been our largest goal. Progress is still happening in the back end towards the atomic library stuff. It is slower this week because one of our developers is out. But those of us that are here and hammering on things over the past week, it's all been website related. There's a couple PRs if you want to dig through what the documentation itself is that's coming. I will open them both really quick just to kind of show where they are. Go here, go here. This is the PR that has all of the contract kit documentation that's coming. Still a lot of formatting that needs to be done. Like some of the list items are broken. We have links that need to be fixed and some more content that needs to be written, but just to show that, this is coming soon. It'll outline how to use the contract kit and what all of the components can be called with and what you should expect to be returned with. And then on the flip side, this section of Antelope has really been blown out to expand on everything that the underlying Antelope library can do. Some of them are getting gigantic. I think transaction itself might need to be its own section, just because there's so many different approaches you can take to the transaction object itself. But it does dive pretty deep into the various parts of the transaction object itself, the struct, how it's serialized, pending signatures, packing and unpacking. There's like 3 or 4 different perspectives that you could use the transaction model for, or the transaction type, I guess. Some of the other ones are just as long. Serializer is going to be a big topic. There's a lot of things you can do with the serializer, and a lot of different ways you can pass data in and get it out of it. Key stuff is done. We have signatures done. Struct, I think this one is still in progress, but it goes over kind of what structs are. We're really just trying to button up all this stuff. The account kit is going to be a new entry. Potentially somewhere between session kit and contract kit. That'll have a couple sections to it as well about how to use the account kit. Some more stuff will be populated under the utilities. So we're really closing in on rough drafts of all the documentation being completed, and then we'll be doing a lot of formatting work, a lot of proofreading, some editing work, and then publishing it out, hopefully as one big package that's like, here is all the core components of Wharf, and here's the documentation for all of them. Like, we'll continue refining it. Like if you guys or anyone else views the documents and it doesn't explain something, we can always add new sections. As I'm responding in Telegram or to messages that are coming my way about how to use it, I'm going to try to start responding with documentation, because I shouldn't have to type out how to do something. I should just be able to send a link to how to do that. If you are trying to answer somebody's question as well about how to use it and none of the links are good enough, that is a point in which the documentation could be improved. So hopefully in the very near future, we're going to be off the main effort of writing the documentation itself. There's a few specifications and stuff that are still not started that we will be included. Those probably won't be in the documentation, but they'll be linked to from the documentation in the relevant areas. And then we're going to be focusing in on guides and starting to actually write a lot more guides that walk through some of the pieces that will like explain how to do things with it. Our approach right now is very much that we have auto docs, which are, the things that we can automatically generate with TypeScript. It dives really deep into the what the parameters are, what the return is, and doesn't give much more else besides being able to link all that through dynamically. It's really kind of boring and there's no human element to it. This document is meant to be kind of the step past that, where it's like, okay, now we're actually talking about what everything is, the types, and why it is the way it is, and how to use it. And then the guides section is one step beyond that, where we start tying all these components together into common tasks that a developer may need to do in order for their application to work. So this would expect a bunch more guides to start here. There's going to be some video content coming in here. And then hopefully we have a decent educational area for this, and people who are looking to get started with any analog blockchain using Wharf are going to just be able to dive in here. They'll find links from the guides into the documentation that'll lead them further down the rabbit hole. And depending on how far they want to get, they can dive into the auto docs or the source code. So trying to create this nice developer path for developers getting involved.
I think the guides here are really some of the most important. It's definitely the only ones that most developers will probably ever need. And the more of those we can have, there's been a bunch of questions about resource provider and all that stuff. So a guide for those small parts would also be good versus throwing people into the deep dive of the docs.
Right. I agree. And I think the way that we've always kind of operated, for better or worse, is we build the pyramid from the bottom up. You can see that as we built core, and then we built EOS-IO signing request on top of core, and then we built a communication protocol on top of ESR. And none of that has been in those really early stages. It's really not super useful to developers because they're not going to get that deep. But now that we're at the top levels of that, where we have Wharf, which is what we expect people to use, we're kind of taking the same approach with documentation, where we started with the auto docs. We made sure that they were generatable. Then we're going to documentation, which is the next level above that. And now we're moving on to guides, which is kind of the surface level of that. So that way we can just keep linking deeper and deeper and let them go down the rabbit hole rather than them just hitting a dead end. So maybe not the best way to do it, but for whatever reason, we just keep gravitating towards this approach where we build from the bottom up rather than the top of the funnel. It just makes things take a lot longer to get to. That surface level stuff just takes that much longer to get to. That's the downside, I guess. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of updates, this is largely where we're at. The code for almost everything is in a very stable position. We're not making huge updates, huge changes. We'll be ready to release 1.0 versions as soon as we kind of get that layer of polish put on it. And once that is complete, we have some starter kits we need to develop, which is largely light coding work. It's just mainly bundling and making it easy to, get a package of these things to use out of the box. And then we've got this atomic assets thing that's going to be pushing on longer, but development, it's really feeling like it's starting to wrap up, and most of our attention's going into documentation. So that's where a lot of our updates are going to be coming. We're still taking a lot of feedback in. I mean, you guys see a good chunk of it in the WharfKit Telegram chat. All of those points that come up, they're being converted into project items and tasks on specific repositories that we will work on getting out in releases, and addressing them however best, based on each individual thing that's being raised. So I don't have too many other updates beyond that. So if there's specific topics we want to jump into today, I'm super open to that. Yeah. Is there anything you guys want to address today?
For me, this is like my third meeting and end of the day for me.
I'm gonna be free.
I'm right there with Shaq. I'm sandwiched between like numerous meetings today. So time getting some time back would be good. But that's not to say that I have questions that I'm refraining. I think that all has been said.
Cool. I mean, I am happy to wrap this up early as well. I've got quite the jam-packed day too. All in all, I mean, I think we're in a good position. I know that the project itself, we slated to be done at the end of September. It is now past that, but the code itself is in a really good place. There's nothing glaring that's standing out, again, except the atomic assets work. And we're just in this educational phase. So feedback on both the code bases and the educational materials as we trickle them out is very welcome. And I guess we can just keep pushing forward. We'll keep doing these meetings as long as we need to. Maybe we can morph this into something that continues on, or maybe this merges into the developer roundtable type stuff in the future. But we definitely want to try to maintain a presence and an open floor for developers that are building front-end applications and want to use Wharf. So whatever that looks like moving forward, I'm game for, and I think our team is as well.
That's an interesting thing to do. Like if we wanted to change the other dev roundtable to a smart contract roundtable and this one to a front-end roundtable.
Yeah. I mean, and they're both.
That's a very good idea, actually.
It's possible that those like overlap, because some developers are doing both roles, just like some developers do front end and back end. But it's super possible, that when you have a team of people, certain people are going to be interested in that smart contract side, and certain people will be interested in this front end side. So I like the idea of splitting them up as well. This call could just morph into whatever the front end call would
Because
be.
generally the smart contract is like in my experience, the smart contract is not going to be the best at front end, and the front end guy is not going to be the best at smart contracts. It's common, because of like just JavaScript, like it's common for the front end to be the same one as the back end, but generally is different than the smart contract. That being said, like it could be both calls are developer focused
On smart contracts, and one is more focused on
front
and back end things that could use Wharf, for example.
Yeah. I think that could make a lot of sense. Cool. Well, as this project gets further and further and closer to completion, we can figure out what that looks like, and then maybe open this up a little bit more. I know we're using Riverside right now just because it's an easy publishing mechanism for us, but it does very much limit the amount of people we can have on stage essentially talking at the same time. So I guess we can kind of follow the lead that the other developer roundtable takes. And, as we try that on Telegram and we see how that goes, maybe this can follow suit.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, we could also do it if you're unhappy. I don't think you've been unhappy with Riverside, but if you're unhappy with Riverside, you could try something else here and use both of them as testing to see which platform developers prefer more.
Yeah, I've been pretty happy with Riverside. It's just that limitation of speakers that I think might.
How many
get
is the
annoying.
limit?
I think it's 8.
Haven't surpassed it yet.
Yeah, we haven't. So, and then the audience is unlimited, and with proper moderation, you could have somebody that's around that is just pulling people on and off stage to join the conversation. But that's more of a production, element at that point. So,
Right. That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, it really would be. So, but yeah, I think moving just kind of in lockstep and all of us working together to figure out how best we set up these kind of meetings, because a lot of good stuff comes out of these meetings. Yeah, we'll figure out moving forward and try to create a good environment for developers that are coming into the space.
Over the next month or so, or after the next month or so, I'm doing a developer cohort, and it would be nice to have. I definitely want these meetings to continue, because these meetings are probably the best place for developers to kind of convene, and the chats don't do justice to the community aspects that the Telegram chats don't do justice to the community aspects that these live chats do. They build more camaraderie than anything.
Yeah.
And on the other side of this, if anybody here wants to run a workshop in that cohort, let me know.
I'm definitely open to it. I think once my workload lightens up a little bit, so
that's one of the reasons I'm aiming for about a month from now,
we're
because
waiting for that
a lot
day.
of stuff closes. Yeah. Aaron, you're about to be ours.
Yep. No, and I think maybe another webinar is in order for the contract kit at some point, because that's a big part of development that really I don't think a lot of developers have started using yet. They need the login functionality, and then they know how to use the old way of working with contracts.
What would be nice, even if you don't have a topic for a particular week, like say we carry on these calls after Wharf reaches at least completion based on milestones. Excuse me. You can have stuff where people come in, like different developers, and they're like,
through discussion, voting, or whatever, they can decide okay, this is what we can attempt to work on today in that session. Where
somebody's typing code and testing how to do something using Wharf. From an example, somebody's giving on, and these can be just educational videos. Over time, you will have a nice set of examples where we're potentially figuring it out on the spot, but it's so useful for the community. Someone can just check in and
pair coding style.
New things.
Yeah. And you were talking about something like this, weren't you, Nathan?
Well, yeah. So we wanted to do a video series where we took developers and taught them how to develop on ES so that we could watch it live. But I like the idea of having anybody just be able to jump on stage. The problem that we ran into when developing that idea was just that it's a lot of work to set all that stuff. The logistics around it aren't or might not be worth the ROI. But I think if it's something that the opportunity is there for anybody to join, and it's not a big deal if nobody does, then that's a really good opportunity for people to step up if they need it, but not push too hard if they don't.
Yeah.
And you can facilitate that
that everybody can start with, you know. So if you're doing a smart contract, maybe there's a basic boilerplate. If you're doing like something
with Wharf, if it's backend in Node.js, if it's front end Svelte, Vue, whatever, you can have like different, like the same examples you have more or less could be a boilerplate that somebody starts with to show something, and could be different people like showing stuff.
I like it. I mean, that's some of the guide video type material that we're planning on right now. It'll just be me doing a lot of that, but there will be resulting like code bases to follow along with, or boilerplates to start and then follow the video along with. But yeah, more materials like that that'll just kickstart. Somebody's like, I have an idea, and okay, here, start your idea with this boilerplate and run with it. And then we can have these sorts of calls for diving into the things that maybe they couldn't get past.
That was something that was requested recently of the documentation by a new developer who was learning how to develop on EOS native specifically. And they were looking for the ability to not only go through guides, but also have a set of quick starter templates, which would serve both purposes. So either it would be able to allow them to bootstrap without having to reinvent the wheel for a lot of stuff. But the other side is also that it just serves as examples of how to do specific things that you normally see in Web3. So a token contract, an ICO, an NFT, a marketplace, the standard kind of stuff, and be able to see how the implementation would look from an Antelope perspective, because it's so drastically different from the Web3 standard, which would be Solidity.
Yeah, it is really different over here.
Yeah, like I think one of the biggest hurdles to like new developers is just setting up an environment. Like if they're doing like smart contracts,
mm-hmm.
The different CDT versions, and now are they going to run their own chain that's local? If they're going to use a testnet, which testnet, and are there even resources available? Are the faucets working? Is it, all the information is like
smeared out from different locations.
But if you have like very simple, clear instructions for new developers, where it's like, okay, you're developing, if you're writing smart contracts not affecting the system, which is like 99% of people, you don't need to do system changes, then use this testnet, for example, or you're like, these are the two testnets, here's instructions on, you pick any one, and here's how to get resources, here's how to do this. Like obviously with Anchor Mobile,
it's nice you can create an account on Jungle, for example, but like you need something
also for the faucet.
Developers aren't really using mobile for development, though.
Yeah.
Like
no, I meant for signing to test, but like they still need to push their stuff, or like at least just to create the account, But really, it's like they need a faucet. They need a way to have access. Like I remember every time I need to integrate something with like just.
It's just to get like testnet tokens. It's like a nightmare. I'm like fucking mining CPU shit on my machine just to
get some basic tokens to be able to test something, and it's kind of a joke.
So I'd like to. It's something I've been meaning to do, and I have a task on myself to do it. I don't know when I'll get around to it, but the way that we set up the EVM documentation was really nice in that aspect, because you could add the network to your MetaMask directly from the documentation through a button using I can't remember what it's called now, but like the JSX for documentation. And the same was true of getting testnet tokens. So there's a faucet built directly into the documentation. And it would be nice to have the same thing for EOS native, so that you could just have a button or maybe some wallet integration with Anchor that would do all of that stuff for you. It would set up an account. It would give you some test tokens. It would stake some CPU and net to you, and basically handle everything to make your life easy.
Yeah, to do that efficiently, because
I very much agree.
And also these testnets can rotate. Like for example, the one you give to devs, you don't have to give them a testnet that's going to be alive for more than 6 months. You can just literally like have a testnet for devs that like rotates every 6 months.
Can use something like Jungle or run their own,
where it might be a bit harder to get some resources, but you can have these kind of like auto resetting like chains in a way, just to not have like a huge history, or even use something like the Diffuse like Bootstrap with they have the support for this migration, where you can literally like take a chain, like
use just a snapshot, normal Node.js snapshot, and be able to boot a brand new chain
with all the state of the old one, all the accounts, all the keys, everything the same, but of course no history. So it could be a way to maintain this kind of like dev chain, testnet chain, without really expecting people to put like growing hardware to run it, at least the maintainers of that chain.
So the web IDE uses the Jungle testnet primarily for exactly those reasons. Even using Gitpod was a no starter, because we didn't want to have people having to fork the repository and sign up to Gitpod and all that stuff. And but that would allow you to have your own running Node.js version, which would be effectively a clean chain. And then the problem there is that we don't want to have to run ephemeral chains for you, because just the resource requirement there is fantastical, right?
No, but I meant you run one chain for everybody.
Well, that's why we're using Jungle, because it's basically just run by the same BPs who are running the mainnet. So it's very close. If you were to move from Jungle as a staging environment to production, it's very similar.
Right, but like that could be easily replicated, like with the non-Jungle, because Jungle gets it like a lot
of different kinds of testing, but it's like a big like chain in a way. So I don't know, like I've always thought like you're making a chain that kind of resets every 6 months or whatever period, so it doesn't grow too much, and just like retransfer the state as the initialization, or like the first step
in the chain. That makes an easy thing to maintain. So you just have whatever producers, and whenever you reset, you make sure you're up to date with everything on mainnet.
But it's not used to test, where like you're testing new features of the actual system changes, which I guess is a lot of the reasons for Jungle. So I don't know, like at some point, Block One was running a testnet, and I think just having like a good testnet
with all resources available to them that they need, without being too worried about it in terms of supporting it in an infrastructure level,
just seems like I haven't used Jungle in a while. I'll preface with that, or Kylan, or any of this stuff. But every time I had to use them, I always ran into, you need to find the person who has the tokens, or like they're doing something now, and it's just like that BP's dropped, or that API is not working. And
Jungle 4 has been a lot better, I can say that. And we did go out of our way to get a bunch of tokens from, I think Crypto Alliance gave it to us. So like we're moving towards being a faucet with Anchor. So that way, you like create an account and we're going to give you 1,000 or 10,000 tokens or whatever, because now we have 10 million tokens. I think Jungle might be able to serve that purpose. I know we use Jungle for all of our Wharf and Anchor. So yeah, I agree. There's some developer onboarding headaches that are a problem there.
We should touch base around that, because we're with the web IDE. A lot of the stuff that I did was also some of the same. So every contract is a new account. The account is provisioned with a certain amount of tokens. Resources are handled for the user. But one of the problems there is that, for instance, if you wanted to use an on-notify, you can't actually send a transfer transaction from the web IDE. So you'd have to send it from something like a wallet, but then that means you have to have an account with tokens, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just not a user, or it's not a developer experience flow that we've solved yet. And maybe the best way to go about that is some kind of synergy between the IDE and Anchor.
Yeah, I definitely could see that as working. It'd be in like the materials. It'd be like, here, you need to grab a wallet. Here's one that you can use, and then here's a free account, and it's just, it doesn't cost anything because it's jungle. And there's not quite as much a reason for abuse. One of the things you mentioned earlier, like we do have free jungle accounts on mobile right now. We don't on desktop, but I think most developers are going to be on desktop. So that's certainly something we need to figure out how to address. So whether it's just built into Anchor, you could be like, I need a test account, and then it just creates it for you. Or there's some external portal.
Well, we could go the other way around. Can you import an account into Anchor from external?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I feed a private key into Anchor, or does Anchor have to give me the private key first?
You can't remotely pass in a private key.
Okay. But I could get a public key, which I can then create an account on and then tell Anchor what the account is.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the easiest solution for the IDE. We just say, hey, log in with Anchor, and then it does all that stuff for you from the web ID instead of from Anchor, and then tells Anchor what the account is.
Yeah. Or if the private key is imported, it can just be like, hey, look up all the accounts that are associated with this. And then we don't need to communicate that back and forth. You can just say, I'm done, and it'll look it up.
Well, I'm thinking of the path of somebody who just installed Anchor after using the web ID, not the other way around.
Got it.
Like first they go and learn web development. Now they want to take it to the next step where they actually deploy something to the mainnet. Because the web ID, in order to deploy something to mainnet, you have to actually log in with Anchor.
Right. Yeah, this is definitely something we can try to find good synergies for.
Yeah, if you just have on like the first login, you know how Anchor would show you like, oh, you don't have any accounts associated with this network or something along those lines. You can just have it like, hey, create an account, like an option to like create an account like you have on mobile, and then it's like,
oh, wait,
this is very easy.
If you don't have an account for that network in Anchor, can you even get a public key?
Yes, it's just you got to jump through a couple hoops to enable advanced tools and then go into the tools and then generate a key.
Oh, so it's something the user has to do on their side to open up the settings.
Yes, in the current
I
iteration.
figured we're talking a bit loosely because you say like Anchor does support it, but it seems you're talking more about programmatically communicating this information back and forth.
Correct.
That I think would be part of the request for permission if we went down that route. Like the underlying mechanism for, like we've talked about request for permission mostly from the sense of like, I want this DApp to be able to do things on my behalf in this application, but the whole protocol communicating underneath it also probably needs some way to say, hey, wallet, I need you to make a private key and give me the public key.
Right.
So that could be part of that or be done individually, like as just a messaging protocol that says, hey, go make me a key. You keep the private key so it's safe, and then give me back the public key. And then that could also open up account creation type services as well.
There were 3 things that were in Scatter that actually got more use than I had thought they would get. They were for my own dog fooding purposes, but they ended up getting adopted by quite a few applications. One of them was the suggest network, which just allowed you to suggest a network to, it's a basic functionality, right? And then the other 2 was one, you had the ability to give it a private key. So the same thing here, but I think the opposite is probably better, where you can just tell it to, or maybe it worked that way, I can't remember, but you would be able to get a public key which was generated for you. Because that way the private key is never given to the web app. It's totally secure. You don't have to worry about anything like that. But the other was to go and say, hey, here's an account that's associated with this key. And then you wouldn't have to go to the network to check if the account is actually there or any of that stuff, even though probably you should. But it opened up a lot of possibilities for applications to do that easy onboarding for developers. And that's what I was using it in my test applications for, so that I could run like, web-based unit testing suites,
Mhm.
and then be able to fill up a dummy wallet with whatever information it needed. But a lot of applications started using that as a way to onboard people onto the wallets, which made it really simple for them to bypass all of the account creators and all that kind of stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. And now that we've been playing with EVM stuff in Unicove, like the whole idea that you can suggest a network in an application to automatically configure it, like that's another big one.
Wait, I thought Anchor had that.
Nope. You got to go in and users got to do it by hand.
Yeah, that's definitely
And the
a big
desktop,
one.
it's not very user friendly too. Like that checklist, you go add it, and then you have to go scroll back to the top and click enable this exchange.
Yep.
So like the whole
Very much agreed.
It's not very intuitive, but he's very technically correct. Like from a dev standpoint, like you can follow it and understand everything.
But for the average user,
Yeah, it needs to be simplified a lot in order to really be usable. And we haven't touched Anchor Desktop in well over a year at this point, except for the version 2 that is slowly coming along. We're hoping to really follow mobile's ease of use in Anchor 2. So that is a glimmer in our eye at this point and not much else. But we have some solid foundation written, and hopefully we'll be pushing ahead with that, depending on, what we need to prioritize to keep afloat. But yeah, those are all really good things that we should include. But, and to like loop all this back to the developer experience.
Just a small annoying thing in Anchor is like when you're sending a transfer, if it errors out for any reason, like it just clears the whole form. So if you're doing like a special memo where you're trying to test a smart contract, it just resets everything.
Yep. Or
Gotta start again.
Yeah, the one that catches me is like I'll go start and I'll fill out transfer information and I'll click submit, and then the ledger's not connected, and so it just immedially errors, and then I dismiss the error and all the information's gone. I'm just like, oh.
That happens to me a lot.
The stupid ledger keeps locking itself.
Then that's the worst.
Yeah. In older firmware, you used to be able to disable it.
You can't disable it anymore?
Not in the version I'm using.
Stupid.
Yeah. What? So super painful for developers. Because I think the longest time frame they allow is 10 minutes, at least again in the version that I'm running. So that's not enough time.
Updating forever, like trying to make sure if it's working. In the case of like secure items, I try not to update.
Yep. For development purposes, I'm constantly updating my ledger now. So I got to bite the bullet.
That's really annoying for Ledger, because that pissed me off until I found that option, and that was like the best option Ledger's ever done. I can't believe they removed it.
Yeah, like let me lock it, or make it like a 3-hour lockout or something.
Yeah,
but it's for the common user, not us developers. So
now you have to build like an Arduino just to like press the button every 10 minutes.
It's one of those little duck bird things that wobbles and pushes the button. Keeps the ledger alive.
Very Simpsons.
Yeah. Cool.
I like us. We're like, we're gonna end early.
Yeah. We talk about a whole bunch of other things.
Like first, we can. Yeah, we all agree. We all need to get back to work.
Hey, some good discussion came out of it though. Like it's not part of Wharf, but it is really part of the developer experience, which I think is what a lot of us are looking at and have been putting up with for years. So
we just instantly turned this into a developer roundtable for front-end developers, like immediately.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, it works. So we'll take that knowledge and apply it somewhere. Awesome. Well, let's indeed button this up 5 minutes early at least. And we can jump back on some of these topics at the next developer roundtable or in the next Wharf call, and we will keep moving forward on all of this stuff.
Sounds great.
Cool.
Sounds
All right.
good.
Well, thanks, guys. We'll chat again soon.